I make my living by repairing and decorating. I usually work alone. It's easier for me. I charge inexpensively, and new clients usually come to me on the recommendation of old ones. That was the case this time too. A guy came to me. He needed to fix up his dacha. The house is solid, but he wanted to renovate it inside. We discussed everything, went and had a look, bought materials, and I went to work. I must say that the dacha was quite far from the city, about 30 kilometers. So I decided to spend the night at the object on the first day of work, not to spend extra time in Moscow. It was summer outside, the weather was warm, and the air was fresh, beautiful. I spent up to 10 o'clock in the evening removing the old wallpaper. I had a quick dinner and settled down on a trestle bed with a book. At 11 o'clock, when I was about to fall asleep, there was a knock on the door. It was so loud that the windows rattled. I didn't like it very much. You can hardly expect good things from night visitors. Then the banging sounded again, stronger, louder. For some reason, I felt my stomach churn and my throat tighten. Although I was not the shy type, the knocking really scared me. I went to the door and asked, "Who's there?" And in response, there was another knock, as if there was a giant at the door. It even shook. And an incomprehensible mumbling. That was the end of my courage. I looked around and realized that my guest, even if my door cannot go in, he can easily get in through the windows, just enough glass with a stone to break. So I decided that I had to wind up the rope. But where to wind them in the middle of the night, when the only door mutters something incomprehensible? Well, there was an attic in the cottage, and it was accessible directly from the room. I went up there, dragged the ladder behind me, put a trunk on the hatch, and sat down on top of it to be sure. And a couple of minutes later, I heard a noise downstairs. It means that the guest broke in. For 3 hours he had been playing, rattling, clanging, stomping. And all 3 hours I heard the same indecipherable, but clearly angry muttering. It was dawn already, and it was lightening outside, when it got quiet downstairs. I crept quietly to the skylight, and saw an incomprehensible creature walking away from the cottage along the path toward the woods. It looked human, but it wasn't. Its arms were too long, its head too big. And he was too tall. All in some rags. He moved in leaps and bounds. It was enough in one glance to crouch in a corner and sit there until the sun came up. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way down from the attic. I looked around and was dumbfounded. The room downstairs was trashed. The furniture was broken. The dishes were all battered. The door was wide open, hanging on one hinge. Nothing to say. The guest had had a good time. I decided to wait until 9 a.m. and call my customer to tell him what had happened. I brewed some coffee and went out on the porch. On the neighboring plot, an elderly woman was already digging in the seedbeds. I called her over, asked if she had heard anything strange during the night. The woman looked over at me, noticed the dangling door, and told me to wait a few minutes. She went into her house, and soon returned with a large bag of salt. As it turned out, she told me to scatter it around the cottage. Of course, I started questioning her, and this is what I found out. These summer houses were built on the place of an old forest. The settlement was right at the edge of it, but a lot of trees were cut down to free up the land. And rumor has it that the forest is not simple, it is guarded by spirits. And the only sure remedy against them is salt. How can you believe it? But I saw it with my own eyes. And when I called my customer, he was not even particularly surprised. Told me not to worry, they say, we'll arrive in the evening and bring more salt. In general, I worked there for a week, and it did not happen again. But I tried not to go outside after dark. And I breathed a huge sigh of relief when I finished the repairs and left the dacha.